The close-up, the correctly illuminated, directed and acted close-up of an actor is and remains the height of cinematography. There is nothing better. That incredibly strange and mysterious contact you suddenly experience with another soul through an actor's gaze, a sudden thought, blood that drains away or blood that pumps into the face, the trembling, the suddenly shiny complexion or mute silence. That is to me one of the most incredible and fascinating moments you will ever experience. Said Bergman, one of cinema's greatest minds. This quote seems to imbue all that is impactful and engaging about the close-up, from its noble beginnings in the early cinema attractions to the modern close-ups we see prevalent in the works of directors like Quentin Tarantino. The close-up has been one of the key and distinguishing features of cinema from theatre. Within this presentation we are going to be discussing and debating the development of close-ups through the silent era and how these alter the way in which silent scenes were constructed. We will analyse and discuss how directors such as D.W. Griffith, who is considered one of the pioneers of film form and style, utilised the close-up, whilst also comparing this to our own silent scene, where we incorporated this technique. We will discuss the impact of retroactively creating a silent scene in a cinematic landscape dominated by sound, how our use of close-up may differ from use in Broken Blossoms. We will also discuss the progression of silent cinema, how this moved from being seen as more than just recorded theatre, and how the use of the close-up aided this development. Early cinema, or sometimes referred to as the cinema of attractions, had a strong focus on documenting what was seen in day-to-day life or the actualities. The scene unfolding tended to be naturalistic, focusing on the mundane. This is seen clearest through one of the earliest films called Workers Leaving the Factory by the Lumiere brothers, made in 1895. It uses a static shot, capturing as much of the scene as possible, and this was a very common technique used in early films. The cinema of attractions was also typically shown at exhibitions along with other early forms of cinema, highlighting the capabilities of the new technology and exploring the new medium. Most of these early films and demonstrations consisted of prolonged long shots with very little cutting, very similar in regards to Workers Leaving the Factory seen here. During this early era, close-ups were not in use. The construction of a silent scene was either focused on documenting or on short trick films utilising sneaky edits to create optical illusions. However, the first recorded case of the close-up was found in G.A. Smith's Grandma's Reading Glasses. It wasn't exactly the advent of the close-up as we know it though. The close-up derived from a young boy looking through his grandma's glasses and seeing objects in enlarged forms. By this point there was still a logical reason for the close-up. People were fascinated by this. Half of the reason as to why close-ups emerged in those early years of cinema was that people had never had the opportunity to stare upon someone's face in such a manner. It became a gimmick, much like technical advancements such as 3D have done throughout cinema's history. Before this advancement, cinema had a tendency to be seen as recorded theatre. Mark Cousins, when discussing Smith's 1903 film The Sick Kitten, said, "Smith showed us that this was not the case. Cinema was not theatre. The link between the two was broken, and the emphasis and intimacy of cinema was born." Cousins argues that the close-up created this distinction between the two art forms. The editing between shot types was what ultimately formed the basis of cinema, thus allowing it to be seen as its own art form. The Sick Kitten, although short and still classed as very early cinema, displayed the capabilities of the medium, and one of the first instances of clear construction when filming the silent scene. There was an active choice made to cut to the close-up of the kitten. Audiences would have been able to decipher the actions within the scene without cutting in. However, it was utilised as the filmmaker believed that the close-up would be enjoyed by the viewer. They would gain more pleasure from seeing this action close up. It provides audience members with a clear focal point and breaks up a scene, creating new interest. This, most likely unknowingly, became a turning point in the construction of a silent scene. Now cinema had its own singular expression of ideas. There are other early instances of the use of the close-up. Within Fell's argument from Film Before Griffith, he states, "However, the device of the subjective shot took a number of years to be generalised, as did another development noticeable in the same year, the close-up cut directly into an action scene. In Gay Shoe Clerk, made for the Edison Company in 1903, a true close-up of a lady's shoe being fitted is cut directly into a long shot of a shoe store scene, in which a salesman is fitting the lady with shoes under the eye of her chaperone. The angle for the close-up is the same as that of the master shot. The close-up scene here is really there to highlight and provide clarity for the audience. It creates the setup for the gag, where the clerk kisses the woman and is ultimately beaten for it. Although the two uses are different, they still enhance the scene overall. Without the gay shoe clerk's close-up to the shoes, the pacing of the gag and more sudden kiss would feel more distant to the audience, as they had had more of an intimate shot of the two characters being closer to them. Audiences are invited to have closer connection in the most literal sense. These are early inclusions of this method, and they paved the way for filmmakers such as Griffith to include them in his films and enhance his narratives without the use of sound. They provide us with the clarity and emotional resonance that we as viewers desire. D.W. Griffith is considered one of the primary filmmakers to have established the close-up as a key cinematographic device for a number of filmic functions, such as clarification, emotional power, beauty, and glamour. As Andrew Sarris said in his 1975 New York Times article, Griffith's revolutionary use of the close-up marked the end of pantomime and theatrics and the beginnings of the cinema actor, by providing this new intimate glimpse into the minute of the actor's performances, thus intensifying the emotional impact of scenes. His close-ups altered the actor's performance style as they were given the opportunity to perform with more intensity and more subtlety, compared to the more melodramatic, histrionic acting methods of theatre. When questioned about his revolutionary change in close-ups, Griffith supposedly stood in front of his producers and asked, "Can you see my feet?" He wanted to replicate what the eye saw and how we can connect with individuals in real life. This is seemingly one of the first instances of a filmmaker who wanted to convey meaning with close-up, instead of simply cutting in for the sake of clarity. It was now beginning to be used to evoke emotion. When making our short film in the style of Griffith, we began to realise the importance of close-ups. Having made films before, we've used close-ups and never really thought about it in terms of utility. But now, having been stripped of the liberty of sound, we found we needed to express desire and motive more clearly. Without the close-up of the lady's face, here we wouldn't be exposed to the same level of expression. We are allowed to pick up on the nuances far easier. We are also positioned with her. The film opens in a wide two-shot, so by this point we could be following either perspective. However, the close-up defines the female character as the protagonist. We have also managed to use the close-up for comedic effect. Something which has trickled down from Chaplin's films is the reaction shot, where a joke is set up, but it being purely visual, we wait for the other character's reaction, which is why the final close-up was used to augment the comedic nature of the actor's expressions of anger and frustration. Another major figurehead in the development of the close-up was the Danish filmmaker Carl Theodor Dreyer. He most notably transformed the way the close-up was used in his 1928 film The Passion of Joan of Arc, in which Dreyer famously broke the rules of cinema by primarily shooting in close-up. Up until this point, analytical editing was the normality, a master shot followed by cut-ins to close-ups, thus establishing the space of the scene. However, Dreyer is not concerned with space in the same way. In fact, Dreyer is using the close-up to eliminate the idea of spatial relations in order to reflect his thematic expressions of isolation and persecution. Bulwer wrote in his book, The Films of Carl Theodor Dreyer, of the film's over 1,500 cuts, fewer than 30 carry a figure or object over from one shot to another, and fewer than 15 cuts constitute genuine matches on action. Dreyer wants the audience to be confused. It seems to reflect the psychological strain that Joan is put under here. Like Griffith before him, Dreyer is using the close-up not purely for clarity or utility, but to reflect an idea, to give cinema more of its own singular identity and language. He also understood that it forced the audience to connect with Joan's emotions and strife in a more intense way. He said himself that, "For me the close-ups were absolutely necessary. I don't know how I could have possibly told the story of Joan's trial and death if I had not had the help of the close-ups in getting the viewers completely inside both of Joan's and the judges' hearts and souls." This at the time might have been too much for audiences. Paul Grange claims that The Passion of Joan of Arc was critically acclaimed for its experimental close-ups, though it failed at the box office despite or because of its chilling psychological intensity and scenes of excruciating physical torture, claiming that the film's initial failure was down to how much further was on screen and how this deeply affected its audience at the time. Dreyer also used several technical innovations in order to be able to achieve his desired aesthetic. By shooting on the newly developed panchromatic film, which is sensitive to all wavelengths of light, meaning Dreyer could shoot Joan without makeup and in soft lighting, thus framing her with a sympathetic and naturalistic lens. This is starkly juxtaposed with the high contrast lighting used for the clergyman putting her on trial, showcasing the grotesque like warts and lumps. The soft lighting used in Dreyer's close-ups of Renee Jean Falconetti is indicative of something wider in the industry, the formulation of the film's star. Mark Cousins' book, The Story of Cinema, said that from the advent of the close-ups, they became giants in the foreground. Out of such imagery grew movie stars and the devotional psychological aspect of cinema. This is an interesting point, that when filmmakers started to emphasize the face, we started to notice the subject as an individual. Actors became individuals instead of being associated with what studio or which director they worked with. Griffith did this terribly well with his close-ups. By asking us to identify with his characters in a more intense way, we simultaneously did with his actors. Lillian Gish became one of the first film stars alongside Florence Lawrence and others. She was popularised in Griffith's seminal and highly controversial epic The Birth of a Nation. She then returned to play the lead in Broken Blossoms. Griffith's emotional close-ups utilised Gish's expressive face. Her powerful performances led to her being labelled America's First Lady of Cinema. With this, changes began to occur. Lenses were smeared with Vaseline to soften the focus on women. This created a more angelic glow to them. Studios began to market films around a single star. Humphrey Bogart, James Stewart, Cary Grant, Rita Hayworth, Marlene Dietrich became glitzy, glamorous legends, and swathes of people became devoted to them. When constructing a silent scene, we found that the close-up was essential in so many ways. We found, much like Smith, Griffith, Dreyer, and countless others, that it could be used in a myriad of ways, for clarity or for thematic expression, or for positioning the audience with an individual, or even to evoke emotion and signal more subtle motives and intentions. The early invention of the close-up with Smith's grandma's reading glasses can't have comprehended its influence and importance over cinema as it is today, an art form in its own right.